Who invited the maid to the head table? Whispered a voice across champagne flutes and laughter, unaware that the woman they mocked would soon silence the entire room. The ballroom at the Starlight Regency Hotel gleamed like a dream. With its towering columns, marble floors, and chandeliers that looked like frozen fire, it had been the perfect venue for Emily's vision of a fairy tale wedding. Guests from her side of the family, politicians, lawyers, and old money elites, mingled in glittering gowns and bespoke tuxedos. Waiters moved swiftly, balancing trays of caviar bites and expensive rose. But in the far corner of the entrance, just as the string quartet shifted to canon in D, the energy shifted. Lucille Johnson entered with the quiet dignity of a queen. Her silver hair was coiffed with care, her pearl necklace catching the light with each step she took. She wore a pristine ivory suit with satin lapels, paired with low-heeled shoes that had walked through decades of storms and triumphs. In one hand, she carried a wooden cane, polished, heavy, carved with initials. It wasn't for style. It was her late husband's, and today, it gave her strength. She paused for a moment at the entrance. People were staring. She had expected stares. After all, she was one of only 2 black people in the entire guest list of nearly 200, and the other was her grandson, Marcus, the groom. Lucille's lips curled into a polite smile. She'd been through far worse in her 84 years. Segregated buses, schoolyard slurs, corporate glass ceilings. This was child's play. Yet, as she moved forward, whispers slithered like snakes through the marble columns. Is she part of the catering staff? One woman in a shimmering gray gown asked, genuinely confused. Another guest whispered, she must have taken a wrong turn from the lobby. Poor thing. Emily's Aunt Deborah leaned over to a cousin and muttered with a smirk, whoever let her in didn't check the dress code. Lucille heard it all. Her hearing wasn't what it used to be, but the tone of condescension always rang loud and clear. As she reached the seating chart, her name wasn't where it should have been. Instead of being listed at the head table with the bride and groom, she had been placed at table 23, tucked behind a curtain near the service entrance. A seat that might as well have come with a label, out of sight. Lucille took a deep breath. She was here for Marcus. She wouldn't cause a scene. Not yet. But Marcus had noticed, from across the ballroom. He had seen everything. The way his grandmother walked in alone, the stares, the deliberate ignoring by Emily's family, the awkward silence as if her presence were some unfortunate oversight. He watched as she searched for her seat, and how her face changed ever so slightly when she realized what they had done. It wasn't a mistake. It was a message. Marcus's hands curled into fists. Lucille was the reason he stood here today, strong, successful, and confident. After his parents died in a crash when he was 6, it was Grandma Lucille who took him in. While working full-time as a bank branch manager, she raised him with discipline and unconditional love. She made sure he had books, not just food. She taught him respect, resilience, and how to hold his head high. Even when the world tried to lower it, he couldn't believe this was happening. On the most important day of his life, across the room, Emily was surrounded by her bridesmaids. She was glowing in her silk gown, beaming at guests, accepting compliments. She looked perfect, elegant, happy, oblivious. Or was she? Marcus walked to the wedding planner. Why is my grandmother seated at table 23? He demanded. The planner flipped through her clipboard. It was approved by the bride's mother, sir. I was told. No, Marcus interrupted. Move her to the head table. She's family. I understand, but the seating, if she's not sitting beside me, there is no wedding. His voice wasn't raised, but it carried weight. The planner's expression shifted. I'll fix it right away. Meanwhile, Lucille had already taken her assigned seat at table 23. The people around her barely acknowledged her presence. A man in a navy suit offered a stiff nod. A young woman beside her turned her back. Lucille smiled gently. It's all right, she murmured to herself. They'll see. Moments later, Marcus arrived, gently taking her hand. Come with me, Grandma. Lucille looked up. Marcus, it's fine. It's not, he said firmly. Come on. He walked her across the ballroom with pride, not missing a single sneer or confused glance as they passed table 1, where Emily's family, SAT, Lucille settled into the seat beside him. Directly in the center of the head table, silence fell over the nearest tables. Emily's mother stiffened. Aunt Deborah frowned. Emily approached slowly, her smile unsure. "Hi, Lucille. I hope everything's okay." Lucille gave her a long, measured look. "I'm just honored to be here," she said gently. "This is Marcus's day. I wouldn't miss it for the world." The subtext was clear. She wasn't angry, not yet. But she hadn't missed a thing. Emily forced a nod and walked away. She wasn't sure what had just happened, but something had shifted, and she could feel it in the air like the calm before a storm. "She doesn't belong at the head table," the bride's aunt whispered, seconds before the groom made the call that would ripple through generations. The tension around the head table was as visible as the crystal wine glasses gleaming under the chandeliers. The air no longer felt celebratory. Instead, it buzzed with a mixture of awkward restraint and concealed irritation, mostly from the bride's side. Lucille sat beside Marcus, her posture regal, her hands folded gently on her lap. Every so often, she'd glance at him and offer a small, proud smile. To an outsider, she might have appeared entirely composed. But Marcus knew his grandmother too well. Behind her calm eyes was the simmering awareness of what was happening around her and what wasn't being said aloud. Emily returned to her seat at the head table, her expression controlled but unsettled. She'd spent weeks planning every detail of this wedding. Now, an unexpected reshuffling had thrown off the script. The seating chart had been handprinted. The floral arrangements designed to cascade symmetrically around each chair. Everything was choreographed for aesthetics, for status, for optics, but none of it accounted for a proud, black matriarch refusing to be hidden away. The table was set for 12. Emily's parents sat directly across from Lucille. Her mother, Patricia, a real estate mogul in Beverly Hills, wore a stiff smile that barely masked her displeasure. Her father, Charles, sipped his wine methodically, avoiding eye contact with Lucille altogether. Patricia leaned toward Emily and whispered behind her napkin, "We discussed this. You said she wouldn't be seated up here." Emily's cheeks flushed. "Mom, she's Marcus's grandmother." He insisted. "She's distracting," Patricia hissed. "This is a wedding, not a charity gala." Lucille didn't have to hear the words to feel them. They clung to her skin like cold mist. She had been in rooms like this before, where people smiled with their mouths and screamed with their eyes. Marcus leaned toward her. "You okay?" Lucille gave him a tight smile. "I've survived worse than a few icy glares." Then, the first course arrived. Heirloom tomato tartlets with goat cheese and basil oil. Lucille wasn't allergic, but her dietary needs had been clearly submitted. She was diabetic and sensitive to certain rich dairy. Her RSVP card, filled out weeks ago, had all of that noted. A server leaned over. "Ma'am, this is for you." Lucille politely declined. "I'm sorry, I requested the grilled vegetable option with no cheese." The server looked flustered. "Oh, I'll check." He returned 10 minutes later. "Still no alternative. It wasn't listed under your table," he explained, then realized the seating error. "You were at table 23 originally." Marcus stood up. "She's not at table 23. She's here. Fix it." The server stammered. "Why, yes, sir." Charles leaned over to Patricia and muttered, "This is embarrassing." Patricia scoffed. "This whole thing is turning into a sideshow." Lucille heard that one. She turned slowly, facing Emily's parents. "You know," she said with a gentle lilt, "I once catered weddings. Back in the day when black women weren't allowed to attend them unless they were pouring tea." Patricia blinked. Lucille smiled, her voice unwavering. "Then I became a bank executive, managed 10 branches. And now I'm watching my grandson marry into a family that believes I don't belong at his side." Emily gasped softly. "Lucille, Lucille didn't look at her. "This suit I'm wearing," she continued, lifting her chin, "I wore it when I signed the loan that helped fund this very hotel's expansion. But please, tell me again how I should have stayed at the other table." The silence that followed was crushing. Aunt Deborah cleared her throat loudly and stood. "Excuse me, I need a moment," she said, stepping away from the table and toward the bar, where she promptly ordered something stronger than champagne. Meanwhile, Marcus was already dialing his phone. "Who are you calling?" Emily asked, concerned. "My godfather," Marcus said. "He's also the managing partner of the media group covering our wedding." Emily's eyes widened. "Marcus, no. I told you I wouldn't tolerate this. I gave your family the benefit of the doubt." Emily looked torn, caught between loyalty and realization. "They're just not used to what?" Lucille asked softly. Black success? Black family? Black pride? Emily's voice trembled. I didn't think they'd act like this. Lucille took her hand. Child, you hoped they wouldn't. That's not the same. Across the ballroom, murmurs were building. The ripple effects had started. Several guests had overheard bits of the confrontation. Phones had come out. A few people were even filming. Not obviously, but subtly, as they always did when drama simmered at rich weddings. The wedding planner arrived again, her face pale. Everything all right? Marcus stood. No, it's not. My grandmother was publicly disrespected by multiple guests. She was misseated, denied her meal, and belittled. We'll fix it immediately. No, Marcus said firmly. I want every vendor here to know. This woman is my family. If they can't treat her with dignity, they can leave. The planner blinked. Yes, sir. Lucille squeezed his arm. You don't need to make enemies for me. I'm not, Marcus said. I'm setting a standard. And as the orchestra tried to resume its next song, guests across the room began to whisper a new phrase, this time not about Lucille's presence, but about her power. She's the one who called them out. She's the grandmother? Wow, I heard she built a whole bank from scratch. Emily looked around, realizing the tide had turned. This wasn't about aesthetics anymore. It was about legacy, and Lucille Johnson wasn't just part of this wedding. She had just become the most unforgettable person in the entire room. Let me tell you who she really is. With those 8 words, the groom shattered every assumption in the room and made sure no one would ever forget his grandmother again. The clinking of silverware on plates had turned mechanical. Conversation around the head table had all but disappeared. Even the band, sensing something strange in the air, faltered slightly between sets. What was once a perfectly planned evening now felt like an unscripted play, and no one, not even the bride, seemed to know what act came next. Emily sat stiffly in her seat, eyes darting between her mother and Marcus. Her wedding smile had faded into a confused, almost anxious neutrality. Patricia, the bride's mother, was seething behind her wine glass. Lucille, ever composed, had placed her napkin gently on her lap and waited, patient and poised. Then, the DJ stepped up to the microphone. Ladies and gentlemen, we now invite the best man and the groom to say a few words. Marcus stood slowly. There was a smattering of applause, mostly from his friends and college buddies, but it quickly died down as he stepped forward and lifted his champagne glass. The spotlight hit his tuxedo lapels, but his eyes were on one person only, Lucille. He didn't look at Emily. He didn't acknowledge Patricia or Charles. Not yet. Before I say anything about love or marriage, he began, voice low but resonant. I want to introduce someone to all of you. Not just introduce her, but tell you who she really is. Lucille blinked slowly. Emily tensed. This woman, Marcus continued, gesturing toward Lucille, raised me when no one else would. After my parents died, she took me into her tiny apartment, fed me on a budget stretched thinner than any of you here can imagine, and made me feel like a king even when we couldn't afford heat. A quiet ripple moved through the crowd. She didn't have fancy clothes or a college degree at the time, but she had something none of you could measure with money, grit, vision, and a heart bigger than any mansion in Bel Air. People were listening now. Forks paused. Conversations halted. She worked 2 jobs. She went back to school in her 50s. She opened savings accounts for Black children in our neighborhood who didn't even know what a bank was. She mentored young girls, showed them how to read, how to save, how to dream. Lucille's hands slowly covered her mouth. She was the first Black woman to manage a branch of Pacific West Bank. And that bank, Marcus turned his gaze to Patricia, was the same one that approved your first real estate loan in 1999. Gasps echoed through the hall. Patricia froze. She never asked for credit, never demanded recognition. And yet, without her, so many of you in this room, knowingly or not, owe part of your success to the systems she helped build. Emily's eyes welled. Her hands trembled in her lap. She's not a footnote in my life. She's the title. And if anyone in this room thinks she doesn't belong at this table, then you don't belong at this wedding. Silence. Thick. Unrelenting. Lucille didn't move, but a single tear slid down her cheek. She never cried in public. But tonight wasn't public. Tonight, Marcus had made it personal. Then, as if on cue, a lone woman stood up from the back of the room. She was elderly, Caucasian, with a bright red shawl. "That's Lucille Johnson?" she asked aloud. Marcus nodded. The woman clapped, and slowly, tentatively at first, others followed. Friends from Marcus's firm. A few guests from Emily's more progressive cousins. And then the sound built until the ballroom rang with applause. Not the polite kind. The kind that comes from people realizing they had just been a part of history and almost missed it. Lucille, eyes brimming, looked at Marcus. "That was more than I deserved." "No," he said, returning to her side. "It was exactly what you've earned." Across the table, Patricia's face was flushed, more from exposure than shame. Charles looked like he wanted to disappear into his suit. Aunt Deborah stirred her drink angrily. Emily rose, shaky, and walked around the table until she stood beside Lucille. "I didn't protect you," she said quietly. "And I'm so sorry." Lucille looked into her eyes, searching. "Do you mean that?" "I do," Emily whispered. "I let their silence drown out what was right. But you stood your ground." Lucille nodded slowly. "Then we moved forward. But we don't forget." Emily returned to her seat, and for the first time all night, Lucille took a sip of her champagne. The DJ returned to the mic, unsure how to proceed, and then a soft jazz melody played. Marcus offered Lucille his hand. "Dance with me, Grandma." She laughed, a full, radiant laugh. "Thought you'd never ask." And in front of hundreds of people, the groom took the woman who raised him to the dance floor. They didn't move like professionals. They weren't elegant or rehearsed. But every step told a story of love, of resilience, of earned respect, and the whole room watched in a one dared look away. "That woman just saved my life 30 years ago." A voice from the crowd broke the silence. What followed was a standing ovation no one had planned. As the first jazz notes fluttered from the quartet, the groom led his grandmother gently to the dance floor. Lucille hesitated for just a moment, not because her feet couldn't move, but because her heart was full and every eye in the room was watching. But then Marcus whispered, "Let's make them remember why we're here." She chuckled and let him guide her forward. They began to sway. Slow, deliberate, not choreographed, but genuine. Each step a memory, each turn a testimony. Guests stared, transfixed, not by the dance itself, but by the unspoken story unfolding between them. The story of a woman who had faced down racism, poverty, and loss, yet still stood tall, still glided with grace. One of the bride's uncles nudged a cousin. She raised him right. "You can see it." Suddenly, from one of the tables near the back, an older man, gray-haired, with a cane of his own, rose slowly and spoke aloud. "Mrs. Lucille Johnson?" Lucille looked up, momentarily frozen. "I just realized," the man said, voice shaking. "You're the woman who approved my loan back in '92. I was denied everywhere else. You sat across the desk from me and said, 'I believe in your bakery.'" Gasps rippled. "You changed my life," he said, his voice cracking. "Because of you, my son went to college. My daughter's now an architect." Marcus stopped dancing. Lucille blinked, stunned. The man walked closer. "Thank you. I never got to say it properly. I didn't know you were this Lucille Johnson." Another voice from a different table chimed in. "She helped my mother keep her home after the 2008 crash. And she funded the after-school reading program in Oakland." Someone else added "in moments." The room transformed from a stiff, judgmental reception to a chorus of stories, each person testifying to Lucille's unseen legacy. People were crying, clapping, standing up one by one to share their fragments of the impact she had made. Emily stood back near her bridesmaids, eyes wide in disbelief. This wasn't just her groom's grandmother. This was a community pillar, a quiet giant. Her voice trembled as she stepped forward and gently took the mic from the DJ. "I have something to say," she announced. The music faded. The crowd hushed. "I planned this day to be perfect," Emily began. "I thought the perfect flowers, the right songs, the dress, all that would make the wedding unforgettable." She looked at Lucille. "But it turns out, what makes this unforgettable is you." Lucille stared, caught off guard. Emily continued, "I let my family's silence speak louder than my heart. I let their approval guide decisions that now shame me. And I let the most extraordinary woman in this room be treated like an afterthought." Patricia looked stunned, but said nothing. "I want to say this publicly," Emily declared. "Lucille Johnson, you are not just Marcus's grandmother. You are the heartbeat of this wedding. And from today forward, you are my family, too." Tears streamed down Lucille's face. Emily stepped closer and hugged her tightly. Whispers of thank you, audible only to the two of them. The band struck up again, this time with energy. The dance floor filled. Even the stiffest guests began to move, including Aunt Deborah, who reluctantly clapped along while sipping her third martini. Later in the evening, a photo booth was set up in the corner. Guests lined up, not to pose with the bride and groom, but with Lucille. Someone placed a floral crown on her head. Others brought her champagne. The DJ made her the guest of honor for a surprise legacy spotlight, where photos of Lucille's life, childhood pictures, banking awards, newspaper clippings, flashed across a large screen near the dance floor. Emily's father, Charles, approached Lucille sheepishly. "I owe you an apology," he said. Lucille raised an eyebrow. "Not just for tonight," he clarified, "but for all the assumptions I've carried my whole life. I saw your skin and your age and thought I knew your story. I didn't." Lucille smiled kindly but firmly. "It's never too late to learn, Charles. But it is your responsibility now to unlearn, too." He nodded slowly. "Understood." Back at the sweetheart table, Marcus and Emily finally sat together again, exhausted but relieved. "She really is something," Emily whispered. "I know," Marcus said. "And now, so do they." Lucille returned to her seat, a small bouquet now resting in her lap, given to her by a flower girl who said, "You're like a real queen." And in that moment, she was. This wedding didn't just unite two people, it redeemed a whole room. The minister's closing words brought a hush that echoed deeper than any VOWs. The celebration continued into the evening. Something had shifted, not just in the tone of the event, but in the people themselves. What began as a tension-filled reception had transformed into a living tribute to dignity, grace, and generational love. And at the center of it all sat Lucille Johnson, no longer seen as the old woman in white, but as the quiet force that redefined the night. Guests took turns approaching her, not out of obligation, but reverence. "You knew my grandfather, didn't you?" asked one guest. "I think you approved my mom's scholarship application," said another. Each conversation uncovered a new connection, a new piece of history, a new act of kindness that Lucille had long forgotten, but others had never stopped remembering. Meanwhile, Emily stepped out onto the garden terrace. The cool air hit her cheeks, still flushed from dancing and emotion. She needed a moment, not because she was overwhelmed, but because clarity had finally found her. Her mother followed close behind. "That speech was unnecessary," Patricia said, arms crossed, lips tight. Emily turned slowly. "You're right. It wasn't necessary. It was overdue." Patricia scoffed. "Don't be dramatic." "No," Emily said firmly. "I've been quiet too long. We all have. I let this wedding become a mirror of your fears, not a celebration of who Marcus is, or who his family is. You're going to regret siding against your own." "I'm not siding against anyone," Emily interrupted. "I'm finally standing with someone. With Marcus. With Lucille. With truth." For the first time in years, Patricia didn't have a response. Back inside, Lucille had taken a seat near the edge of the dance floor, where a flower girl had fallen asleep on her lap. Her fingers gently combed through the child's curls as laughter and music played around them. Marcus returned with 2 glasses of sparkling cider. "Thought you might want a break from champagne." Lucille smiled. "Thank you, baby. You made history tonight," he said. "I didn't mean to," she replied. "I just wanted to eat my dinner in peace." They both laughed. "You know," Marcus said, "when I was 12 and the kids at school teased me for not having parents, I used to wish I could just be invisible." Lucille looked up. "But now," he continued, "I'm proud of everything. You taught me not to shrink, to never let other people's shame become mine." Lucille's eyes glistened. "You've become more than I ever imagined." He reached for her hand. "Because of you." Later that night, as the final dance played, Marcus and Emily stood before their guests for the send-off. But before they left, Marcus raised his hand once more. "I'd like to propose one final toast," he said. "To legacy." He turned to Lucille. "To the sacrifices we never see, the strength we forget to honor, and the voices we finally learn to listen to." Everyone stood, glasses raised. To Lucille, the crowd echoed. And then, before stepping into their getaway car, Emily removed her veil, walked up to Lucille, and placed it gently into her lap. "I want my daughter to wear this someday," she whispered, and know exactly who it belonged to. Lucille held it tightly, lips trembling. Then I'll keep it safe. The doors closed behind the bride and groom. The engine hummed, and the guests, once strangers separated by prejudice and pride, lingered longer than anyone expected, talking, laughing, asking questions they'd never dared before. As for Lucille, she sat there for a moment longer, watching the moonlight filter through the marble arches of the hotel, her cane resting across her knees, a veil in her lap, and a calm smile on her face. Not because the night had gone perfectly, but because it had finally gone truthfully.